In the dark corners of the galaxy, where the law is nothing more than a suggestion, a human soldier finds himself in a battle not just for survival, but for the freedom of a mysterious alien woman once treated as property. But freedom comes at a price, and for Kai Renner, that price means facing off against a powerful information broker with the galaxy's most dangerous eyes on him. Will they escape the clutches of those who want to control them, or will the galaxy's shadowy underworld swallow them whole? Buckle up, because this is just the beginning of their fight for survival, freedom, and something more. Something Kai never saw coming. Stay tuned to find out what happens next in this gripping sci-fi saga. The dull ache in Kai Renner's skull was the first thing he felt as he began to stir awake. It wasn't a headache, it was something far worse, like his mind was a battalion of drills, all working in perfect, torturous unison. He groaned and pressed his palm to his temple, rolling onto his side. The world spun, but it wasn't just from the hangover. It was something far deeper, like the remnants of a violent storm inside his head. The sterile white ceiling of his quarters aboard Eclipse Station slowly swam into focus. The sharp, blinding lights above did nothing to ease the confusion that had settled in his brain. His mind grasped for clarity, trying to piece together the events of the previous night, but only fragmented memories came back. A firefight. Xander, the alien broker, and Liquid. Exotic. Burning. Gods, he muttered under his breath, his head pounding as the words barely left his lips. The memory of the night before seemed to crawl back, thick with smoke and violence. Xander had insisted on celebrating after Kai pulled his reptilian hide out of a firefight with rival traders. Of course, the celebration had turned into an assault on his senses, exotic liquor flowing freely, Xander laughing, telling stories that felt as though they were steeped in centuries of galactic trade. But nothing in that memory prepared him for the present reality. Kai's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, but the motion was slow, his body sluggish from the alcohol still coursing through his veins. He was about to roll out of bed when he noticed the figure standing across the room, motionless, a silent observer bathed in the cold light filtering through the station's tiny windows. His hand froze midair. He tried to focus, but his vision was still clouded, his senses hazy. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, eyes fixed on the floor. As the fog in his brain lifted, his military instincts kicked in, despite the throbbing pain in his head. Kai's hand grabbed the edge of the bed, pushing himself up with force, his muscles protesting as he tried to stand. "Who the hell are you?" His voice cracked, the words rougher than he intended. The figure finally stepped into the dim light, and for a moment, Kai thought he was seeing things. The woman before him was not human. Her skin was a deep crimson, marked with pale, intricate patterns that shimmered faintly as she moved, almost like tattoos glowing with life. Her silvery hair flowed in two perfect strands down her shoulders, a sharp contrast against the rich red of her skin. She was tall and graceful, her features stunning in a way that made her look otherworldly. She wore nothing but tattered, beige fabric, pieces barely clinging to her, revealing more than they covered. The fabric barely registered as clothing, more like strips of cloth that hinted at her vulnerability. But it wasn't her appearance that gripped him most. It was the energy cuffs around her wrists, glowing softly with a faint blue light, pulsing in the quiet room. "I am your reward," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes never leaving the floor. Kai froze, his hand still on the edge of the bed. He blinked, trying to make sense of the words. What? My reward? The confusion was palpable. His mind raced, but the alcohol and the pounding headache slowed his thoughts to a crawl. The woman raised her eyes slowly, their color striking. Amber. Almost gold, with vertical pupils that glowed faintly like the markings on her skin. There was fear in them, but also a deep resignation. A look that made Kai's heart twist in an unfamiliar way. "Xander sent me," she whispered again, almost apologetically, her voice quivering slightly. The words hit him harder than he expected. Kai sat back down on the edge of the bed, struggling to process. "Xander?" he muttered under his breath, remembering the scaly alien broker's words last night. A gift, a reward. Kai was still reeling from the alcohol, but the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. "Look at me," Kai said, more softly than he meant. His voice cracked slightly, the weight of his words carrying more than he expected. For a long moment, she hesitated, Then, slowly, her amber eyes met his. There was a fleeting vulnerability in them. "What's your name?" Kai asked, his voice gentle, though his mind was in chaos. She looked at him for a moment, as though the question itself was something unfamiliar. "Leora," she finally replied, her voice like a whisper, full of uncertainty. Leora. The name echoed in his mind, but it didn't fit the situation. She wasn't just an alien reward. She was a person, a living, breathing being. And yet, Xander had sent her here to be a gift. Kai stood up, his legs shaky, his body still aching from the alcohol. He was angry, confused, and more than a little disturbed by the whole situation. "No," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "This isn't happening." His words came out with more force than he intended. Leora flinched slightly at his tone, but didn't move. The fear in her eyes was almost palpable, like she was waiting for a blow. The sight made Kai's stomach churn. She wasn't a thing. She wasn't a gift. He stepped forward, closer to her. "You're not a thing, Leora," Kai said firmly, trying to catch her gaze. "You're a person. I don't know what Xander told you, but I don't own people." His voice softened then as he saw her expression shift, confusion flickering in her amber eyes. "But," Master Xander said, she started, the words heavy with confusion, as if trying to reconcile what she had been taught with the reality of the situation. "I don't care what Xander said," Kai interrupted sharply, though the anger wasn't directed at her. "I don't care about what anyone else thinks. You're free. And if Xander thinks that he can just hand you over like property, he's got another thing coming." She looked at him, blinking as though his words were too much for her to process. "But Master." "No." Kai cut her off again, this time more gently. "You're not a slave, Leora. Not here. Not with me." He reached out slowly, his hand hovering over her wrists where the cuffs glowed softly. "I'm going to take those off, okay?" The fear in her eyes deepened, and she stepped back slightly, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Please, no. If you reject the gift, Master Xander will be dishonored. He will have me terminated." Kai froze, his hand halfway to the cuffs. "Terminated?" He repeated in disbelief, his mind slowly starting to piece together the horrific reality. This wasn't just about Xander's twisted sense of honor. This was about a life being traded, discarded if it was unwanted. Leora nodded, the words coming out flat and devoid of emotion. "I was to be disposed of before Master Xander decided I would make an appropriate gift." Kai's breath caught in his throat. The rage inside him surged, a flash of heat that threatened to boil over. This wasn't just wrong. It was monstrous. The anger he felt wasn't just directed at Xander, it was directed at the whole system, the galaxy that allowed things like this to happen. Leora wasn't just a slave, she was a victim of a broken, callous universe, and Kai wasn't sure how much longer he could stand by and let it happen. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached forward again. This time, he touched her wrist, the energy cuffs still glowing softly. "I'm going to get these off you, Leora," he said quietly, "and I'm going to get you out of here." For the first time since he'd woken up to find her in his room, something other than fear flickered in Leora's eyes, a faint glimmer of hope. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Kai felt the weight of the world on his shoulders as he released the energy cuffs. They fell to the ground with a soft click, their light fading as they dropped away from her wrists. She stared at the cuffs for a long moment, her fingers gently tracing the pale imprints left behind on her skin. "Better?" Kai asked, his voice gentle, though his heart was still heavy. Leora looked up at him, her eyes filled with something Kai couldn't quite place. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something Kai hadn't expected to see in someone who had been treated like property. "Yes," she whispered, barely audible. "Thank you." And in that moment, Kai realized that he hadn't just freed her from the cuffs. He had freed her from the world that had treated her like less than human. But that was only the beginning. The real challenge was just beginning. Kai's mind raced as the full weight of the situation hit him. He had just removed the energy cuffs from Leora's wrists, but the truth of the matter was that their freedom had only just begun. The real battle wasn't over the cuffs or the chains. It was for her soul, for her dignity, for the right to be a person rather than a possession. He watched her as she gingerly flexed her hands, the marks of the cuffs still visible on her skin, faint but undeniable. She stared at the empty cuffs on the floor for a long moment, as if trying to understand what had just happened. It was clear that she had never been given the luxury of choosing her own fate. Leora's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the silence between them. "What happens now?" Her eyes met his, a storm of confusion and uncertainty reflected in their amber depths. Kai swallowed hard, looking away for a brief moment, his heart tight in his chest. "I don't know, but what I do know is that I'm not going to let anyone treat you like that again," he said, his voice firm with conviction. She nodded slowly, as if weighing his words against everything she had been taught to believe. "Thank you," she said softly, the words almost alien to her lips. The gratitude in her voice struck him, though it was laced with a sadness that didn't belong to her. She wasn't just thanking him for removing the cuffs. She was thanking him for giving her a glimmer of something she had long since lost. Hope. Hope for a life that didn't revolve around ownership and control. Kai clenched his jaw, frustration building in his chest. He had never expected to find himself in a situation like this. Suddenly the protector of an alien woman who had been treated as little more than a commodity. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let her slip back into that world. Not after what he had seen in her eyes, not after seeing the person she truly was. "I need to get in touch with Xander," Kai said after a long pause. He didn't want to think about it, but the reality was that they were still caught in Xander's web. He wasn't about to let the alien broker off the hook for using Leora as a pawn in his twisted game. Leora flinched at the mention of Xander's name. It was a subtle movement, but it was enough for Kai to see the unease it caused her. Her eyes flickered with fear again, and Kai immediately regretted his words. "Leora," he said gently, taking a step closer to her. "I promise you, I'm not going to let him hurt you. I'll make sure of it." Her gaze locked onto his, and for a moment the world outside the room seemed to fade away. The tension in her shoulders eased just a fraction, though she remained wary. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "If you go after him, it will only make things worse for both of us." Kai frowned, stepping closer. "What do you mean? What could be worse than this?" He gestured toward the empty cuffs and the broken fragments of her past. Her eyes fell to the floor. "Xander, he's not just a broker. He has power here. On Eclipse Station, the rules are different. He can ruin lives with just a word. And if he feels slighted, if I'm rejected..." She trailed off, as if the very thought was too much to bear. Kai felt a chill crawl up his spine as the gravity of her words hit him. Eclipse Station was a lawless place. People like Xander operated in the shadows, where the rules of the Earth Alliance held no weight. A mere disagreement could lead to an untimely end, both for Leora and for anyone who dared stand in Xander's way. "Then we leave," Kai said suddenly, his voice steady but tinged with determination. "We get out of here. We find a way to get you somewhere safe, somewhere Xander's reach can't touch." Leora shook her head slowly. "Where would we go?" she whispered, the question holding a world of hopelessness. "I have nowhere else. No clan, no family. I was abandoned after my world was destroyed. And now, if I leave here, I will be nothing, a nobody." Kai took a step back, trying to process the weight of her words. The pain in her voice was raw, a deep wound that no one had ever acknowledged. She wasn't just a slave, she was a survivor, a displaced soul in a universe that had no place for her. Her life had been shaped by loss, betrayal, and survival, things that he, in his own way, could understand. He had been a soldier for years, fighting for causes that often felt hollow in the end. But this was different. Leora wasn't just another mission. She was a person who had been broken by the same forces that Kai had always fought against. "Leora," Kai began, his voice softer now, "you're not a nobody. You're not nothing." He placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to convey something he wasn't sure how to put into words. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but you're not alone in this anymore. I won't let anyone take away your future. We'll figure this out together." She met his eyes again, and for the first time a faint flicker of something other than fear shone in her amber gaze. Trust, perhaps, or maybe just the smallest glimmer of hope. It was enough to give Kai the strength to push forward, to find a way to give her a chance at a new life, away from the chains of her past. "Together," she echoed softly, the word tasting strange but sweet on her lips. It wasn't a word she had been allowed to say in her life before, not without consequences. But now it felt like a promise, something real that she could hold on to. Kai nodded, more to himself than to her. Together. They stood there for a long moment, an unspoken agreement hanging between them. There was no turning back now. No matter what the cost, Kai knew he wouldn't let Leora face this universe alone. He had to find a way to give her the freedom she deserved, even if it meant confronting the power that held Eclipse Station in its grip. Kai turned to the communications panel in the corner of the room, his mind already working on the next step. I'm going to find Xander. I need answers, and I need to know how far his influence reaches. Leora's voice stopped him before he could move. Kai, she said, her tone quiet but firm, be careful. If you do this, you might not just be risking your life, you might be risking both of ours. Kai met her gaze, a fire burning in his chest. I know the risks, but I'll take them. You deserve better than this, and I'm going to make sure you get it. Leora didn't respond at first, but after a long pause, she nodded, as if she had finally decided that maybe, just maybe, Kai could be trusted. The thought of someone standing by her side, of someone fighting for her, was a foreign concept, but was a concept she was beginning to understand. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't seem quite so bleak. There was hope, and hope, after everything she had endured, was more powerful than any weapon. As Kai prepared to leave, Leora followed him to the door. They both knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, but it was a path they would walk together. The time for running was over. It was time to fight for their freedom. Kai moved swiftly through the corridors of Eclipse Station, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on his shoulders. The station was a hive of activity, a place where every form of life, from the most humanoid to the most grotesque, could be found haggling, selling, and trading in the shadows of the lawless space station. Every step Kai took felt like it brought him deeper into a web of entanglements he had never wanted. But the promise he had made to Leora, that he would get her out of this place, was one he couldn't break. Leora walked silently at his side, her posture straight but tense. She had barely spoken since their conversation earlier. Kai had given her space, knowing that the weight of her past was not something easily shaken off. She had been a slave, a tool for others to control and use. The idea of freedom, of being her own person, was something new, and it wasn't going to be easy for her to embrace. They reached the heart of the station's bustling market, where traders of all species shouted their wares and tried to make a living in the grimy underworld of Eclipse. The station, like the people who inhabited it, had seen better days, but its decay had given rise to a strange kind of vitality. This was the place where deals were made in the dark, where promises were empty and loyalty was just another form of currency. Kai stopped at the entrance to a quiet corner of the market, a place he knew well. It was where Xander had set up shop. The alien broker wasn't one to frequent the noisy, crowded areas. He preferred the shadows, the places where information flowed as freely as currency, and where people like Kai could be turned into pawns in his game. Wait here, Kai said, turning to Leora. I'll be back in a few minutes. Leora's eyes followed him, filled with uncertainty. Are you sure about this? You're going to confront him. Xander has a lot of influence here. Kai nodded. I don't have much of a choice. I need to know why he gave you to me, like some kind of reward. I need answers. Leora hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. I understand, she said quietly, though the fear in her eyes hadn't faded. Just be careful. With that, Kai stepped into the dimly lit hallway leading to the back offices where Xander usually did business. The air was thick with the smell of alien spices, metallic tangs, and the acrid scent of sweat and greed. As he passed through the hall, Kai's fingers brushed the grip of his sidearm, just in case. He wasn't sure what Xander's reaction would be, but he had learned long ago that in places like this, it was always better to be prepared. Xander's office was tucked away in a quiet corner of the station, its entrance hidden behind a set of sliding doors that looked like they had been salvaged from another time. As Kai approached, he saw a pair of guards posted outside, their reptilian features alert as they watched him approach. They were large, heavily armed, and seemed entirely disinterested in the business that had brought him here. Kai walked past them without a word, his boots echoing softly against the metal floor. He didn't stop until he reached the door and pressed the access panel. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a dimly lit room filled with holographic screens and data streams, the glow from which cast a ghostly light over the walls. Xander was sitting behind a large desk made of some kind of polished, dark material. The alien broker was a saurian, his scaled green skin shifting to a light purple as he spotted Kai entering. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with 4 muscular arms that made him look both intimidating and capable. His eyes, slit pupils and reptilian in appearance, narrowed as he glanced at Kai. "Ah, the hero of the hour," Xander said, his voice a gravelly mix of amusement and calculated politeness. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Kai Renner?" Kai didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked into the room, his gaze cold and sharp. "I came to talk about your gift," he said, voice steady but laced with tension. "Leora, you gave her to me like a reward." Xander's lips curled into a thin smile, his scales shifting to a more relaxed shade of purple. "Ah, yes, the Narian female, a fine specimen, a rare gift indeed." Kai's fists clenched at his sides. "She's not a gift, Xander, she's a person. You don't just hand someone off like an object." Xander's smile faded, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. "You Earthlings," he muttered, as if Kai had said something ludicrous. "You have such quaint notions of ownership, don't you? On Eclipse Station, things are different. We trade in more than just goods here. We trade in lives, in power, and Leora, she's mine to give." "You don't own her," Kai said, stepping closer. "Not anymore. I don't care what you think of her, but you can't just use her as some kind of pawn in your little game." Xander's eyes flashed with annoyance, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. His hands clenched into fists, and the air around them crackled with tension. "You think you can just walk in here and tell me what to do? You, a soldier, fresh from Earth's backwater system, think you understand the rules here?" Kai didn't flinch. "I don't care about your rules. I care about her." Xander studied him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, his forearms folding across his chest. "You saved my life, Kai Renner. I owe you a debt, and I honor that debt. But in doing so, I have given you a gift. The Narian female is mine to trade, and I've decided to give her to you. You don't like it? Fine. But know this. If you reject her, there are consequences. You'll have made an enemy of me, and that's not a position you want to be in on Eclipse Station." Kai's blood ran cold at the veiled threat. He had no illusions about Xander's reach. The Saurian broker wasn't just some petty dealer. He was a kingmaker, someone with deep ties to the criminal underworld of Eclipse. If Kai crossed him, there would be no place for him to hide. Still, the anger burned in him. He had made a promise to Leora. He would not let her be a pawn any longer. "I don't care about your threats, Xander," Kai said, his voice steady, though his heart raced with adrenaline. "I'm not leaving here without her, and I'm not treating her like property." Xander's scales darkened, his lips curling into a vicious sneer. "You have a lot of spirit, human," he said, his voice now a hiss. "But you won't win this one. I have too much power here. The Narian female is nothing but a small part of a much larger game. If you want to walk away from this, you'll do so on my terms." Kai didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the desk, his eyes locked on Xander's. There was a moment of silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Kai said, "I don't think you understand. I'm not here for a trade. I'm here to make sure she's free. And if you try to stop me, you'll regret it." Xander's face twitched, but he said nothing. The tension in the room was palpable, this thick enough to cut with a knife. Kai could feel the power shifting between them, and for the first time, he wasn't sure who would win. Xander broke the silence with a soft chuckle, his scales returning to their usual purple hue. "You have spirit, I'll give you that," he said with a sigh. "Fine. You want to play it this way, Kai Renner? We'll see how long that spirit lasts when you have nothing left to bargain with." Kai didn't flinch. "We'll see." As Kai turned to leave, he knew one thing for certain: the real fight was only just beginning. Xander had made his move, but Kai was done playing by the broker's rules. And as much as Xander controlled Eclipse Station, there was one thing he couldn't control: Kai's will to protect Leora at any cost. "Let's go," Kai said to Leora as he stepped back into the hallway, his mind already spinning with plans for the next move. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The corridors of Eclipse Station seemed even more oppressive than usual as Kai and Leora made their way back to the quarters. The clamor of alien voices, the flashing neon signs advertising everything from illegal tech to forbidden pleasures, felt like a weight pressing in on them. As Kai looked at Leora, he could see that the tension in her posture hadn't lessened, but there was something new in her eyes, a flicker of resolve that hadn't been there before. Kai could feel the burn of determination starting to take hold in him as well. The encounter with Xander had only strengthened his resolve to get Leora out of here, away from Eclipse Station and the nightmare that her life had become. There was no going back. Not now. Xander thinks he can control this place, Kai muttered under his breath, his gaze hard as they passed through the crowded market area. But I'm not going to let him control you. Leora didn't reply at first. Her steps were measured, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if she were still trying to keep herself together. After a few moments of silence, she spoke softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But how? Where do we even go from here?" she asked, her amber eyes searching his face, as though trying to gauge whether he had a real plan. Kai stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. The question was simple, but it cut deeper than she probably realized. "I don't know yet," he admitted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "But I'm not letting you stay here, Leora. You deserve more than this." She nodded, though it was clear that the fear still lingered beneath her composed exterior. I never thought there would be a way out," she murmured, looking down at the floor. "I've been a slave for so long. My whole life it's been nothing but surviving. I didn't know there was anything else." Her words stung more than Kai expected. He had never truly stopped to think about what it must feel like to live as someone else's possession, someone who didn't even have the right to their own body or their own will. The weight of the thought nearly crushed him, but he pushed it away. This wasn't the time to feel sorry for her. This was the time to act. "Well, now you do, and I'm going to make sure you get the chance to find it." They continued walking, the sounds of the station swirling around them as they made their way back to their quarters. Kai kept his pace steady, his eyes scanning the crowd for any signs of danger. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. Xander had made it clear that this wasn't going to be easy, and Kai had no illusions about the kind of power Xander wielded on Eclipse Station. "Stay close," Kai said, his voice low. "We need to stay out of sight for now. I'm going to get us off this station, but it won't be easy." Leora nodded, staying right by his side as they approached their quarters. As they reached the door, Kai keyed in the security code and stepped inside. The door slid shut behind them with a soft hiss, and for a moment, there was only the silence of the room, broken by the hum of the station's engines in the distance. Kai didn't waste any time, and he went straight to the communication terminal and began scanning through the available ships docked at the station. There had to be something, some way out. He couldn't let Xander trap them here, not when freedom was within reach. As Kai focused on the terminal, Leora stood off to the side, her eyes distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. She had been through so much, and Kai knew that the last thing she needed right now was more pressure. But they didn't have time to waste. "Leora," Kai said, breaking the silence, "I need you to focus. I'm looking for a ship that can get us out of here. The sooner we leave, the safer we'll be." She nodded slowly, her posture straightening as she turned to face him. "I understand," she said quietly, though there was a trace of unease in her voice. "But what about Xander? What if he comes after us?" Kai met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "He will. But that's why we need to move quickly. If we leave at the right time, with the right cover, we can slip past him." She swallowed hard, her brow furrowing in thought. "And if we can't get away in time?" Kai paused, looking at her with a mix of determination and regret. "Then we fight," he said quietly. "I won't let him take you, not again." There was a long silence as Leora processed his words. Kai could see the shift in her demeanor. She was no longer a frightened girl, but a woman who was beginning to realize the weight of her own power. It was subtle, but it was there. "All right," she said, her voice steady now. "Then we fight, together." Kai felt a surge of something he hadn't expected. Admiration, perhaps. He had never imagined that Leora, someone who had been treated as less than human, could come to such a decision so quickly. but she had. And for the first time since their paths had crossed, Kai believed that maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of this alive. With renewed determination, Kai turned back to the terminal. His eyes scanned the listings, the options running through his mind. He needed a captain who wouldn't ask questions, someone who would be willing to take on 2 fugitives with no questions asked. The hours were ticking by, and he could feel the pressure mounting. The longer they stayed on Eclipse, the more dangerous it would get. Suddenly, a name caught his eye. Captain Maddox, a former Earth Alliance Marine with a reputation for working with the independent freight sector. He had heard whispers of the man before, a tough ex-soldier who didn't play by the rules. If there was anyone who could get them off Eclipse, it was him. Kai's fingers flew over the controls, sending out a quick message to Maddox's ship. As the message sent, Kai leaned back, rubbing his temples. He was running on fumes, his exhaustion catching up to him. But he couldn't stop now, not when they were this close. "You think Maddox will take us?" Leora asked, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and doubt. Kai nodded. "He's our best shot, but we'll have to meet him at the docking bay first. We'll need to have some credits to pay for passage." Leora hesitated before speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what if he won't take us?" Kai stood, walking over to the small closet where his gear was stored. He grabbed his blaster and checked its charge, his mind already running through the worst-case scenarios. "Then we'll find another way. But I'm not leaving you behind, Leora. Not for anything." She nodded, a small, determined smile tugging at her lips. "I know." Kai gave her a brief, reassuring smile before turning to the door. "Let's go. We don't have much time." As they stepped into the corridor, the weight of what was about to unfold settled over them both. Eclipse Station was a dangerous place, and getting out alive was never guaranteed. But for the first time since they'd met, Kai felt that they might just have a shot at making it. Together. The long walk ahead would be fraught with danger, but it was a path they would walk side by side, and that, Kai realized, was all that mattered. "Stay close," he said as they made their way toward the docking bay, "and don't look back." The corridors of Eclipse Station were like a maze, a labyrinth of twisting paths and hidden corners, each filled with the hum of life, lives that had long since learned to adapt to the lawlessness of this place. It was a space where morality was a vague concept, and survival often meant doing whatever was necessary to get by. Kai had learned this the hard way, but now, as he walked alongside Leora, he felt like he was navigating the very heart of danger. His mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. They had made their way through the bustling market, down the crowded streets of the station, and now they were heading toward Docking Bay 17, the designated rendezvous point. The air around them was thick with tension, but it wasn't just the station that pressed in on them. It was the weight of what they were about to do. Kai glanced at Leora, walking beside him. Her footsteps were measured, but there was an unmistakable tremor in the way she held herself, as though she were still uncertain of the ground beneath her feet. She was still adjusting to this new reality, to the idea that she wasn't someone else's possession, that she wasn't bound by the cruel hand of fate anymore. He could see it in her eyes. The mix of hope and fear, a fragile combination that both terrified and inspired him. The hope was new for her, something foreign, and yet it was there, sparking in her gaze. He had given her a choice, but the freedom to choose wasn't something easily embraced, especially after years of being denied it. Leora had lived a life where decisions weren't hers to make, where she had been nothing but a tool in someone else's game. They rounded a corner, and Kai's eyes scanned the hallway for any signs of trouble. His grip on his blaster tightened. This wasn't just about getting them out of here anymore. It was about survival. Xander would stop at nothing to get Leora back. Kai knew that, but what he didn't know was just how far Xander would go to ensure she remained his. The closer they got to Docking Bay 17, the more Kai felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. He had a plan, but plans never went smoothly, not on Eclipse Station. There were always variables, always people looking to make a profit off someone else's pain. As they reached the entrance to the docking bay, Kai motioned for Leora to stay close. They slipped past a few workers loading cargo, their movements careful, calculated. The door to the bay slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the large, cavernous space filled with ships of all sizes. The docking bay was a hub of activity, pilots and crew members bustling around, cargo being loaded and unloaded, and security personnel watching with indifferent eyes. "Stay alert," Kai murmured to Leora as they moved deeper into the bay, looking for any sign of Captain Maddox's ship. Leora nodded, her eyes scanning the area, her expression unreadable. She was still getting used to this, walking freely, without being watched, without the constant fear of punishment for every step she took. It was a strange freedom, one she wasn't yet sure she could fully accept. But she was trying. That, at least, was something. Kai's eyes scanned the ships lined up in the docking bay. There were so many. Smaller freighters, like transports, some sleek and modern, others old and battered, their hulls worn from years of service. But there, at the far end of the bay, was the ship they were looking for, the Wayward Sun. It wasn't much to look at, an old cargo hauler with a battered hull and a few dents along its side. But Kai knew it well enough. The ship had seen more than its fair share of work, and its captain, Maddox, was someone who had a reputation for getting things done, no questions asked. Kai's pulse quickened as they made their way toward the ship. He kept his pace steady, though every fiber of his being was alert, aware of the danger lurking just beyond the reach of his vision. There was no telling when Xander's men would show up, but Kai knew that if they were going to get out of Eclipse Station, it had to be now. As they neared the Wayward Sun, a tall figure appeared at the ship's loading ramp. Captain Maddox. His build was solid. A man used to hard work. He had the air of someone who had seen it all, someone who didn't ask questions because he knew better than to get involved in things that didn't concern him. His blonde hair was cropped short, his face tanned from years of exposure to the harsh light of space. When he saw Kai and Leora approaching, his lips quirked into a brief, knowing smile. "Right on time," Maddox said, his voice deep and gravelly. He didn't look at Leora immediately, but when he did, there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He sized them both up, his gaze lingering on Leora for a moment longer than necessary, but there was no judgment, only curiosity. "You got the credits?" Maddox asked, his voice low as he stepped aside to let them aboard. Kai pulled out the payment chip from his pocket, his hand brushing against the cold metal of his sidearm as he handed the chip to Maddox. 10,000, just like we agreed." Maddox took the chip, glanced at it quickly, then slid it into his datapad. A moment later, the transaction was confirmed, and he nodded. "Good enough. We leave in an hour." Kai exhaled in relief, but there was no time to relax. He looked around the bay again, his senses on high alert. "We can't afford to wait. Xander will be coming for her. He'll know we're leaving." Maddox's eyes narrowed. "I know the game, Raynor. You think I don't know what's going on here? But we're not sticking around to play Xander's games. If you want to get out, we go now." Kai gave him a sharp nod, his mind already racing through what needed to be done. "All right, but we leave now. No stopping. We'll take the back exit and head straight to the ship." Maddox didn't argue. He simply led them up the loading ramp, and the door sealed behind them with a hiss. The ship felt like a refuge in the chaos, the metal walls a cocoon from the dangers of Eclipse Station. But Kai knew it wouldn't be safe for long. Xander was powerful, and when someone like him was insulted, they didn't just forget. Leora followed closely behind him, her movements cautious but determined. She hadn't said much since they arrived, but Kai could feel the weight of her gaze on him. There was something in it now, a quiet trust that hadn't been there before. It was a small thing, but it was enough. Enough to make him believe they had a chance. As Maddox made his way to the cockpit, Kai found a seat near the back of the ship. The engines hummed to life, the vibrations a steady pulse beneath his feet. He looked out the small window, his heart racing as the ship slowly began to lift off. Eclipse Station faded into the distance, but Kai knew that it wasn't over yet. They had taken the first step toward freedom, but the real battle was still ahead. Maddox's voice crackled over the intercom as the ship broke through the atmosphere. "Hold tight, folks. We've got a long haul ahead of us." Kai leaned back in his seat, his fingers flexing against the armrest as the ship surged forward. There was no turning back now. They were leaving Eclipse Station behind, but they were headed straight into the unknown. And whatever came next, Kai was ready to face it, because now, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. He had Leora by his side, and together they would make sure that no one, especially not Xander, would ever control her again. Kai stared out at the stars, the vastness of space stretching out before them. They were free, at least for now. The wayward sun cut through the cold expanse of space, its engines humming steadily as it pushed further away from Eclipse Station. Kai sat in the cramped, dimly lit passenger cabin, his thoughts swirling with the chaos of the past few hours. The ship felt like a temporary refuge, the walls barely enough to block out the growing tension in his chest. They had escaped, but the danger wasn't over. He glanced over at Leora, sitting across from him. Her eyes were fixed on the view outside the small porthole, though her expression was distant, like she was lost in thought. The stars outside were nothing new to Kai. He'd seen them 1,000 times, but for Leora, the sight of them was probably something entirely different, a reminder of what she had lost, of the world she would never return to. Kai cleared his throat and stood up, walking over to the small kitchenette where a steaming mug of synth coffee awaited him. The liquid was far from real coffee, but it was the best they had, and right now, it was enough. He took a sip, the bitter warmth spreading through his chest, grounding him for a moment. As he did, he watched Leora, noting how she hadn't moved a muscle since they left Eclipse. She seemed frozen in time, like she was still trying to process everything that had happened. After a long, silent pause, Kai sat down across from her, studying her carefully. "Leora," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I know this is all a lot to take in, but we need to talk about what comes next." Her amber eyes flicked to him, though they were still clouded with uncertainty. "What comes next?" she repeated quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "We keep moving forward," Kai said, leaning forward in his seat. "We make sure Xander doesn't catch up with us. We get to Earth Alliance space, and you get the chance you deserve. Freedom. A future where you're not anyone's property." Leora's gaze dropped to her hands, which were folded in her lap. "But what if it's not enough?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "What if I don't know how to live free? I've spent my whole life being owned, and now everything is so empty, so uncertain." The weight of her words hit Kai harder than he expected. She had been a weapon, a tool, nothing more than an object for so long that she didn't know what it meant to be her own person. Freedom was an alien concept to her, and he realized how much work they would need to do to help her find herself again. "You'll figure it out," Kai said gently, his voice low but reassuring. "It's not going to be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but you're not alone in this anymore." Leora looked up at him, her expression softening just a fraction. For the first time, she didn't seem like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. There was a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe trust, that made her appear just a little more human in that moment. Kai continued, trying to keep the tone of his voice steady. "I don't know what your life was like before, but I do know this. No one deserves to be treated like you were, and I'm going to make sure you have a chance to live a life that's truly yours. No one will control you. I promise." Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Trust, maybe, or reassurance. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I'm trying," she said quietly, her voice still shaky, "but I don't know how to be someone's equal, not after everything I've been through." Kai gave her a small, understanding smile. "You don't need to be perfect, Leora. You just need to be yourself, and I'm going to help you figure out what that means." The silence between them felt different now. It wasn't filled with tension or fear, but with something gentler, something that resembled a bond. Kai didn't know what was going to happen in the future, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing something right. Like he wasn't just fighting for survival, but for something greater than that. Something worth fighting for. Just then, the intercom crackled, breaking the quiet tension in the room. "Captain Maddox here," the gruff voice said. "We're approaching the outer rim of Eclipse Station's range. We'll be in deep space soon. You're clear of their sensors, but stay alert. Xander's people might try to follow, so don't get comfortable just yet." Kai immediately stood up, his military instincts kicking in. "Understood, Maddox," he replied. He turned to Leora, who had also risen to her feet. "Get ready. We've got a long way to go before we're truly out of the woods." She nodded, her face set with determination. It wasn't the same uncertainty that had marked her earlier. There was something else there now. A quiet strength, a flicker of the person she could become. As the ship hummed along, leaving the grip of Eclipse Station far behind them, Kai couldn't help but glance back at Leora. She had changed in the short time they had spent together, and for the first time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for both of them to escape their pasts and build something new. The stars outside the viewport stretched out in front of them, endless and unreachable. But as Kai looked at Leora, he saw something that made the vastness of space seem just a little less daunting. Together, they could face anything. Kai made his way to the cockpit where Maddox was at the helm. The captain was a man of few words, his face a mask of concentration as he guided the wayward sun into deep space, leaving the chaos of Eclipse Station behind. Maddox didn't look up as Kai entered, but spoke in his usual no-nonsense tone. "You sure about this, Renner? I'm not asking questions, but you know the risks. Xander doesn't take kindly to people crossing him, and you're dragging an ex-slave into the mix. If word gets out, you're both going to have a bounty on your heads faster than you can say, 'space pirate.'" Kai leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "I know the risks, but we don't have any choice. Leora's not going back to Eclipse, and Xander won't let her go easily. I don't care what it takes. We'll deal with it." Maddox grunted, eyes never leaving the control panel. "Yeah, well, just remember, you're not the only one on this ship. Don't make us all enemies of the galaxy." "I won't," Kai replied, his voice firm. "But we're getting out of this alive. All of us." The stars stretched ahead of them, a vast and endless field of light in the cold, dark expanse. But Kai didn't feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Not anymore. They were free, for the moment, and no matter what came next, he would fight to keep them that way. Kai sat in the small, cramped cockpit of the wayward sun, the ship's low hum vibrating through the metal floors beneath his feet. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched infinitely, a sea of cold, distant lights. They had left Eclipse Station behind, but the journey ahead wasn't any less perilous. The further they traveled into deep space, the more vulnerable they became. Their pursuers, Xander's people, could be lurking anywhere, waiting for the right moment to strike. He couldn't let his guard down. Not for a second. Beside him, Captain Maddox was working the controls, his hands moving with practiced ease. The ship was steady, but there was an edge to the atmosphere in the cockpit, an unspoken understanding between them that this wasn't just a routine trip. Every jump, every shift in direction was a potential risk. Kai's eyes flicked to Leora, who was sitting in the rear of the cockpit, her back straight, her amber eyes focused on the stars outside. She looked calm on the surface, but Kai knew the storm brewing inside her. This was all so new for her. The concept of freedom, the concept of choices. It wasn't something she had ever known. The door to the cockpit slid open, and Leora stepped in, her footsteps soft but purposeful. She stood for a moment, hesitant, watching the vastness of space through the small window in front of her. Kai glanced over at her, his voice low, trying not to disturb the fragile silence. "Everything okay?" Leora turned to face him, her face expressionless, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. Kai turned away from the controls for a moment, his brow furrowing. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now, but we're going to figure it out together." She didn't respond immediately, instead shifting her gaze to the stars outside. The glow of distant suns reflected in her eyes, but there was a shadow in them, a look of someone who had spent too long running, never truly knowing what they were running toward. "I'm not used to not being afraid," she said at last, her voice almost too soft to hear. "I don't know what freedom even looks like. I've always had a place, a purpose, even if that purpose was to be used." The words struck Kai harder than he had expected. He wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make her believe in herself, but he knew better. This wasn't something that could be solved with a few comforting words. She had lived a lifetime of being less than human, less than a person. The very idea of agency, of having control over her life, was foreign to her. "Leora," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "freedom isn't easy. It's not something that's handed to you. You have to fight for it every single day. but I promise you it's worth the fight." She looked at him then, her amber eyes searching his face, trying to understand if he meant what he was saying. She could see the sincerity in his gaze, the quiet determination behind his words. "Do you really believe that?" she asked softly. "That freedom is worth the fight?" Kai met her gaze directly, without hesitation. "I've fought for my freedom my entire life, and it's worth every damn moment." The silence that followed felt heavier than it had before, but this time it was different. It wasn't the weight of fear or uncertainty that hung in the air. It was something else, something that could only be described as the quiet connection that had been forming between them. Leora was beginning to trust him, not just as a protector, but as someone who understood. "I'll figure it out," she said after a long pause, her voice more resolute than it had been when she first spoke. "I don't know how yet, but I'll figure it out, for myself." Kai nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. That's all anyone can ask, one step at a time. The ship jolted slightly, and Maddox's voice came through the intercom, breaking the moment. "Brace yourselves, we're making the jump to hyperspace." The familiar hum of the ship shifted, the air around them vibrating as the engines powered up. Kai felt his muscles tense, his hand instinctively reaching for the console. He turned to Maddox, who was already focused on the controls, his eyes sharp. "We're jumping to the Proen system," Maddox said, his tone grim. "It's the last stop before we reach Earth Alliance space. We'll need to refuel there before continuing." Kai nodded, but his thoughts were already racing. The Proen system wasn't exactly the safest place for fugitives. The entire system had a reputation for being a haven for smugglers, black market deals, and people who had something or someone worth hiding. If Xander had any informants out here, they'd be on them before they even touched down. As the ship's engine whined and the stars outside stretched into streaks of light, Kai turned back to Leora. "Stay alert. We'll have to be careful once we land. If Xander has eyes everywhere, we need to make sure we don't give ourselves away." Leora gave him a small nod, her jaw set with determination. "I'll be ready." They both knew the stakes had just been raised. Proen was a dangerous system, and while they could refuel there, they couldn't afford to stay for long. If they did, they would risk exposure, and if they were exposed, they would be trapped. Xander would make sure of that. The jump was smooth, and the stars outside warped as the wayward sun shot into hyperspace. Kai leaned back in his seat, his thoughts never straying too far from Leora. She was ready. He could feel it in the way she held herself. But there was still so much she had to learn. About herself, about what it meant to live freely. He couldn't give her all the answers, but he could help her find them. They had to survive Proen first. The jump lasted for hours, the steady hum of the engines filling the quiet moments. As the wayward sun emerged from hyperspace and entered the Proen system, Kai couldn't shake the nagging feeling at the back of his mind. The clock was ticking. They had only a limited amount of time before someone noticed them. He glanced at the navigational map, his eyes scanning the various signals of nearby ships and stations. "We'll have to dock in the outer rim of the system," Maddox said, his voice breaking the tension in the cockpit. "There's a small refueling station near the edge of the Proen system. It's off the radar for most of the larger ships. We'll keep a low profile." Kai nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "Let's do it. But we'll have to move fast. If we're going to make it to Earth Alliance space, we need to get out of Proen without anyone noticing us." He could feel the weight of Leora's gaze on him again. She was silent, but the tension in her body spoke volumes. It was the same tension that had been there ever since she had started to truly understand what freedom meant. But Kai knew, deep down, that once they made it to Earth Alliance space, she would be safe. Safe. A word that had never truly applied to her life before, and that, more than anything, was what kept Kai moving forward. "Hold tight," Maddox said as the ship made its descent toward the refueling station. "This isn't going to be a smooth landing." Kai braced himself, the tension in the air thickening as the wayward sun dipped toward its destination. They weren't out of danger yet, and every moment counted. But for the first time, Kai felt that they might just make it. Together. The wayward sun descended slowly toward the refueling station, nestled on the outskirts of the Proen system, its engines humming low and steady, the sounds of space stretching between the stars. Kai could feel the familiar pulse of anxiety creeping back into his chest, a constant reminder that the safety they'd found was fragile, temporary. The farther they went from Eclipse Station, the less control they had. It had been hours since they had entered Proen, and every moment felt like they were on borrowed time. The Proen system was known for its lawlessness, its mercenaries and smugglers lurking in every shadow. Xander's reach had extended far beyond Eclipse Station. If he had even a whisper of their whereabouts, they could be facing the most dangerous part of their escape yet. Leora was quiet as she stood at the small viewport, her face illuminated by the stars outside, eyes distant, as if lost in thought. Kai noticed the tension in her posture, the same stiffness he had seen before. She was still adjusting to the notion that her life could be hers to shape, still learning how to walk without fear hanging over every decision. "Leora," Kai said, his voice softer than before. "You doing okay?" She turned to him, her amber eyes meeting his with a flicker of something that resembled a smile. But it was fleeting, as if the weight of her past still held her in place. "I don't know how to feel, Kai. Everything is changing so fast. I don't know how to be free. I've never had to be anything else." Kai stepped up beside her, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "You're going to figure it out," he said with a quiet conviction. "You've already started, and I'll be with you every step of the way." She nodded slowly, but her gaze remained on the stars. She wasn't convinced. Not yet. But he could see the spark of something new, starting to form in her. A trust, a possibility. Before he could say more, Maddox's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're coming up on the station now. I'm going to land us in the outer dock. Keep your heads down and don't attract attention. We don't know who's watching." Kai looked at Leora one last time before heading toward the cockpit. She followed him silently, as always, her movements deliberate. She was ready, even if she didn't quite believe it yet. They both knew they were about to enter the lion's den. Proen wasn't a place you entered without a plan, especially not when you were running from someone like Xander. As they entered the cockpit, Maddox looked up from the controls, his face etched with the same grim determination that had been present since they'd left Eclipse. "We'll have about 10 minutes before we're docked," he said, his hands expertly guiding the ship toward the station's landing bay. "Get what you need quickly. We'll be in and out." Kai nodded, glancing at Leora one last time. "Stay close," he ordered. "Don't talk to anyone unless it's absolutely necessary." She gave a slight nod in response, her face serious. For all her hesitation, there was something in the way she stood now that told Kai she was finally beginning to embrace the power she had over her own future. She wasn't just running anymore, she was walking toward it. The wayward sun shuddered lightly as it made contact with the docking bay. The hum of the engines faded, replaced by the hiss of the airlock's ceiling. A soft glow filled the cockpit, the lights dimming as the ship settled into its berth. Kai stood up first, moving toward the hatch. He could feel his heartbeat picking up speed. It was time. They didn't have long. Proen was a maze of alleyways and hidden corners, and Kai knew better than anyone that if they lingered too long, they'd attract unwanted attention. Leora followed him closely, her eyes alert as she stepped off the ship into the landing bay. The space was vast, filled with freighters, cargo containers, and the faint smell of oil and old metal. The hum of activity was everywhere, but the station was quieter than usual, too quiet as if something was about to go wrong. Kai's eyes scanned the bay, his instincts screaming at him to be cautious. He could feel it, the buzz of danger in the air, but he also knew that if they didn't move now, they might not get another chance. "We need to head to the lower level," Maddox said, appearing beside them. He pointed toward a set of stairs that led deeper into the station. "It's a little less monitored down there. From there, we can make our way to the transport docks. I've arranged for a ship to take you further into Alliance space, but we need to keep our heads down." Leora nodded, but her eyes were wary, scanning the area as if she expected someone to jump out at them at any moment. Kai could feel the tension building again, the same tension that had filled him on the way to Eclipse. But this time it was different. They were closer now. This was their shot at escaping it all. "Let's move," Kai said, his voice sharp. They moved quickly, trying to keep as low a profile as possible while making their way through the shadows of the station. The lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls as they moved through the narrow hallways. They hadn't gone far when the unmistakable sound of footsteps reached their ears. Kai's instincts flared, and he immediately pulled Leora to the side into a small alcove. They flattened against the wall, holding their breath, their bodies tense with anticipation. A group of 3 mercenaries appeared, walking casually through the hallway. They were talking in low voices, their footsteps echoing as they passed by, oblivious to the fact that they weren't alone. Kai held his breath, his hand resting on his blaster, ready to act if things went south. He didn't dare make a sound, his eyes tracking every movement. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. One mistake, one slip-up, and everything they had worked for would be over. But luck was on their side. The mercenaries moved past them without noticing, their voices fading into the distance. Kai let out a slow, controlled breath, his fingers loosening their grip on the blaster. "That was too close," Leora whispered, her voice tight. Kai didn't reply immediately. Instead, he turned and led her back into the hallway, his pace quickening. They couldn't afford to stop now. Every second they spent in the open was another risk they couldn't afford. "Keep moving," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "We're almost there." They pushed forward, moving through the labyrinthine corridors, down to the lower levels of the station. The further they went, the quieter it got. The stations grew darker, more abandoned, less friendly. But it also meant fewer eyes on them, fewer people who could recognize them or report back to Xander. Finally, they reached the transport docks, a darkened section of the station that smelled like oil and old machinery. A small ship, one that looked like it had seen better days, was waiting for them. It was their ticket out of here. "We're good," Maddox said, motioning toward the ship. "Get on board. We'll head out immediately." Kai gave one last look at Leora. Her face was set, her jaw clenched in determination. She was ready. Without another word, they boarded the ship. As the hatch closed behind them and the engines powered up, Kai let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They were free. For now. But he knew this wasn't over. The road ahead was still dangerous, and Xander wouldn't let them slip away that easily. Still, as the ship lifted off and the familiar hum of the engines filled the cabin, Kai allowed himself a moment of quiet relief. For the first time in a long while, they were moving forward, away from the shadow of Eclipse Station. And for the first time, Kai believed that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at something better. The stars ahead felt a little less distant, the path a little less uncertain. The fight wasn't over, but they were one step closer to freedom. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey. We hope you enjoyed the adventure and the twists that kept you on the edge of your seat. If you liked the story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to never miss another exciting chapter. Your feedback means the world to us, so leave a comment below with your thoughts on the story and what you want to see next. Your support helps us bring more of these epic tales to life. Until next time, stay curious, stay adventurous, and keep watching.